PLO Order, another video, another topic. This time it's the good, the bad, and the ugly, which means that on the table we have the good, which is us, we have the bad, which is just a calling station on the bit line, and we have the ugly, who is a maniac on the middle position. So how to play when we have an aggressive maniac on the table, and then we have a guy who cold calls a lot of our 3 bets on the button. So let's get started. Let's put the hologram on. Yo, hello. So let's focus on the bad and focus on the ugly. So the situation is we are on the button. And we have a middle position who now opens 62%. And then we have a bit blind who cold calls 3 bets around 15%. And now the question is, how do you adjust your strategy, or do you adjust your strategy? And once again, you get a lot out of the video that instead of just watching this video, now you think for a few minutes, if you are on that situation, because we have been there. Especially in small states, we have maniacs, we have complete maniacs, we have cold callers, we have calling stations, we have such a variety of players that it's very rare that you are on 6 max, you pick dealt, and you have no information on any of the opponents, so everyone is average player or everyone is good rep. Because you always have some kind of players, and then the question is, do we adjust? How do we adjust? And today we're not going to very precise strategy. I'm not going to tell you, should you 3-bet here A7, 6-5 or not. That's not the point. The point is overall adjustments. How much we need to adjust, how much should we adjust. And I'd start to remind that I strongly believe that in poker we should have our standard strategy. It's some other sites and coaches use just a different name, but the idea is we have a standard strategy which tells how do we play certain things in certain position. And in our standard strategy, we, especially at small steps, we don't have any mixing. It's not like, oh, I'm sometimes calling with aces, sometimes opening. Yeah, you can do that, but then we have certain combinations of pocket aces that we are called free for, we have certain that we raise. So like our calling aces would be rainbow disconnected. Like ace-7 deuce rainbow, standard play, we always call. So we don't have a mix strategy for certain hand. Because the problem in mix strategy is that it justifies anything. So if you allow yourself to have a mixed strategies, then in reality, no one knows that, okay, if we face an open, then with ace-king, jack 9 in a suit, then we have a mixed strategy of 62-38% of 3-betting or calling. And then we use a random generator. You kind of memorize everything. So often people say that I use mixed strategy because they are not sure what to do. And it's an excuse to justify whatever they did. Like someone says, why did you open the hand? They say, well, I normally don't, but now I decided to mix something. And that's just bullshit. And I don't want any one of you to make those excuses. Either we open the hand or we don't in a standard strategy. Then when we have information on the opponent, we can deviate from the standard strategy. But if we don't have the information, we don't deviate from the standard strategy because we don't have any reason. The standard strategy is what we think is the optimal way to play certain spots. So, how would you change your standard strategy? If there's an acro opener and there's a cold caller who just cold calls your 3 bets quite often. And not sure if you thought about it, I hope you did. At least you can write it down or just think about. And let's start to open up this riddle. From the past videos, we had a situation where I made a scene that versus a maniac, how do we react? And that's not in PLO Order videos, it's on the YouTube as an open video. How do we adjust when we have open maniac who opens over 60% of hands? And in that scene, it was quite clear we 3-bet more, and as a rule of thumb, when the opener is on the middle position, from cutoff and button, we go from 5% to around 11. It's like from 4.8 to 10, and then from around 5 to 11.5. So if we just simplify a little, we kind of double up the 3-betting range to make it very simple. We 3-bet twice as much, which is quite a lot. Now, the sim is 5-max sim where there's no phone equity with 3-betting. So if someone opens and we 3-bet, they never fold. And maniacs never fold. If I make a normal sim where just middle position opens 65% or 70%, then he's going to fold a ton to 3-bets because he doesn't want to make minus EV play. But that's why I have the sim where there's no phone equity with 3-bets. So if a maniac opens, he's always calling. So it's very accurate. So we just start to 3-bet for value a lot. Then we had a previous video. How much do we change our strategy if we have that cold caller on the big blind, who cold calls around 15% of the 3-bets? In that video, if you remember, or if you haven't seen it, then go watch it. It's in PLO Order videos. Then our button strategy versus the middle position doesn't really change. I mean, 3-betting was the same, calling dropped from 16 to 14, but that's not relevant change in my opinion. So in simplified terms, if big blind is a calling station, we don't adjust. So we don't increase the 3-betting range. So now we have information that versus maniac, we can definitely 3-bet more for value. But then we know that 15% of times there's going to be a cold call, which creates multi-way pot. So do we still 3-bet that 11.5%? Or is it some kind of compromise? And how much do we make compromises and so on? And that's pretty interesting how solver reacts. Then, of course, a whole nother discussion is how do we react? But let's first see how solver reacts. And then let's discuss a bit about should we play solver strategy on that kind of situation. Same principles apply. We 3-bet more versus aggro, and the cold caller doesn't really affect our strategy too much. And here are the numbers. Normally, button versus middle position, no phone equity to 3-bets. We have this 5-16 strategy. We 3-bet 5%, we call 16%, overall range 21. So in the 20s, 3-betting, pretty strong hands. Then if the button is an aggressive player, the maniac who opens a lot, we 3-betting 11.5, I round it up to 12. So our overall defending frequency goes up to 27. So from 21 to 27. So we play a lot more hands. 27% of hands is all the crude looking hands and actually slightly more. Good rule of thumb is that good PLO hands, like if you say that, okay, that's good PLO hand, it's 20% around. So 27 is actually quite wide, and that's often contradictory how people react to maniacs. They start to tighten up their range a little. Going to discuss about that, because both of those are right. And then, when we have the maniac and we have the calling station, now it doesn't change much. The calling station, though, the cold caller doesn't really affect too much our strategy because we have position, we have range edge, and in reality we have the skill edge. So once again, if we have a calling station on the blind, it doesn't affect our strategy. Our 3-betting frequency drops a little. So now, let's first talk about the solver strategy. I check the sim and check certain categories of hands to see if there's certain range that we 3-bet significantly less than the others. Like, do we want to 3-bet less some kind of hands that don't work in multi-way pots that good or something like that? But in the end, it pretty much on every range, it dropped frequency just a little bit. So in all of our 3-betting range, besides aces, but from kings, queens, rundowns type of hands, we just the threshold goes slightly up. But of course, from 12 to 11, it's the same. No one can play perfect. It's just the principal idea that we still want to treat it with wide range, even when we have the code color, because it makes sense. If we have a guy who opens 70%, 60 to 70% of hands, and we treat it with around 11 or 12% range, our range has a huge edge over his range. So we treat it for value. And that range has an edge versus 15% code color. So, and we have position like, if our 3-bet-in range and his code calling range are very close, the position gives a huge edge. So we don't have to hold back. And in solver, even the maniac plays perfect post flop with his ranges. And the code caller plays perfect post flop with his ranges. The only thing solver in that sim is the frequency to play. So he's forced to play more hands, but he plays them as well as he could. So in solver, no one makes mistakes post flop. And in reality, maniac makes a lot of mistakes. Code caller makes a lot of mistakes. So the EV of your strong hands goes up significantly compared to solver sims. So now the question is, here you can see that button versus aggressive, we defend 27% of hands. And I would say that from 20 to 27, the bottom 7% of the hands are quite problematic. Because then in reality with that range, what goes beyond 20 or so, you will hit a lot of mediocre hands like bottom 2 pairs or middle pair, semi-weak flush draw, try 2 pairs, bottom 2 pairs, kind of those, and cut shot and jack high flush draw, which will give you a lot of tough decisions when you face the pressure from the maniac. And solver doesn't have pressure. Solver makes perfect decisions. So it's easy for solver to play the range like when played perfectly versus perfect maniac, 27% depending frequency is optimal. In reality, I wouldn't play that much because the bottom of your range will put you in a tough decisions. And solver can play perfectly to gain really small edge in EV. But in reality, you often end up in a lot of questioning, how should I make a call down? How aggressive he is? We don't know his strategy, which means we can make more mistakes. And in that scenario, I would like to tighten up the range a little. Like keep this, we 3-bet most hands, call, let's say 8%, so our overall defensive frequency is 20%. We still print money with the strong hands. Because even the maniac, often people think that if someone plays 70% of hands, he's always going to have a weak hand. I know he's always going to miss the flop. But in reality, those guys also have nuts. They also hit strong draws. They have pocket aces in their range. So often might happen that you just give a lot of value to the aggro when you have a semi-weak. And it's a lot easier to play versus aggro if you have ace or king high flush draw than when you have 10 or 9 high flush draw. So to keep you out of the harm's way, I would play tighter. I understand why solver doesn't because he plays perfectly. But definitely you can start to 3-bet more. Now, the thing is, you kind of want to know how the maniac reacts to 3-bets. How wide is he 4-betting? And I wouldn't start to 3-bet a lot before I know that, because if he's 4-betting, like let's gamble with any decent hand, then it's easy. Or you know that, okay, he's still 4-betting only aces and kings. It's easy. But if you don't know what he's 4-betting, suddenly when you 3-bet with wider range, you will face a 4-bet, but you don't know how often. So it takes a bit of time. So before you start to adjust too much, pay attention to maniac. It's the same principle. We adjust when we have information. And to widen the 3-betting range a lot, we need information how the opponent reacts. Is he 4-betting a lot? Is he not? Because otherwise, we start to 3-bet pocket kings and he 4-bets and we're like, okay, well, what to do? And depending on his range, it would be easy shove or it would be easy fold. Or we call because we don't know what to do, and then the flop is 7-9 deuce and he shoves and we have no idea what to do. So if we want to 3-bet more, we understand that, okay, he will face 3-bet more. How does he react? And when we know that, it's easier to adjust the 3-betting range. So before adjusting too much, I would wait for a while and see how it affects. But the takeaway from all of those simulations and videos is out of position cold callers don't affect our strategy as a simple rule of thumb. Of course, now comes the question, what if the cold caller is on the button and we are on the cutoff? How do we react? How much should we 3-bet aggressive if the cold caller is in position? Problem is, if we make that sim, then the button will have a huge edge because he has position and everyone is as huge post flop. In reality, the cold caller probably doesn't beat us post flop in skill, which increases our EV. But I would say that our 3-betting range doesn't ever go probably higher than that 11, 12 or so. So it's like super tight UTG range, and that's a value range purely. Value range suitable for multi-way pots. Whatever happens, it's a strong range. So all those cold callers, they increase your EV. They never drop your EV if your 3-betting range is purely for value with strong hand. It's when you start to 3-bet all kind of nonsense, Jack 9, 7, 4, crappy hands. That's when your EV starts to drop when there's those cold callers. But as long as we 3-bet for value and strong hands, it's good to remember that cold callers, calling stations, whatever. If they call nice, more money to the pot, we have a strong range. If we hit the flop, we win even more, and so on. So a lot of discussion from pretty simple thing, but I challenge everyone to think, how do we adjust to opponents whose strategies and frequencies are not balanced? They are not solver strategies. Of course, when we make the simulation, we can force certain frequencies, but everything else is balanced. So at the moment there's no way to check out the optimal way to play versus a maniac who has certain post flop tendencies. We could do that versus in certain flops to force him to bet too much and so on, so on. It's really complicated. It's really hard to get good feedback from the sim, so we have to think about our riddle. And versus maniacs, it's not just about the pre-flop. Don't think that, okay, somewhere says we need to 3-bet more, so every time when I have a maniac on the table, I just start to 3-bet more. And that's the way to go. No, it doesn't mean that. You have to think what kind of maniac the opponent is. How aggressive he is post-flop. Let's say we have a player who, if he opens and you call, then he's almost always triple barreling. But once you 3-bet, then post-flop he plays according to his hand strength, because now you are the aggressor. You are the one who's dominant player. So he goes to sort of hit or miss mode. Then we miss a lot of value if we start to 3-bet too much. Because every time when we call and hit the flop, let him triple barrel with air and we just have the money. But once we 3-bet, now it's a game of who hits the flop and who doesn't, and our edge goes down a lot. So if someone is super hyper aggressive post flop, just blind aggression, do we want to 3-bet anything? Besides, of course, aces, kings, where we want the low SPR so we can stack off on most flops. Because the post flop playability is hard, but with hands that have good playability, it's a question, should we call more and let him be aggressive? So it doesn't mean automatically that just 3-betting more is always the best way. Sometimes it is. If opponent is very aggressive pre-flop, but post-flop he has some kind of thinking, he doesn't go bananas post-flop, now we want to 3-bet more. Because his aggression post-flop is not that blind. So we want to 3-bet more and just punish his weakness, which is bad pre-flop range. If his weakness is too aggressive post-flop, we want to give him the rope. So I hope you understand that every time when we face non-balanced players, the balance simulations are not the truth. It's not what you need to do to win. It's not optimal. It's a tool to give you some ideas, understand how should we react if the opponent is balanced. But when we have very unbalanced opponents, we need to think. And that's the key to make money in smaller stakes. It's a key to make money in higher stakes. It doesn't matter what the stakes are. If opponent is unbalanced, we have to use our head. How to exploit. How is he unbalanced? What is his weakness? Why and how we exploit that weakness. So I hope you enjoyed the video. I hope it gave you some thoughts and ideas and makes you think on the tables. It's also actually, before we stop, it's a good way to practice, good exercise. Like, if you have color codes on the opponents or HUDs, so you have a lot of information on the opponents, then sometimes on the table, check out your opponents and think where the money comes from. In fast poker, it doesn't really work because people change all the time. But when it does work, is you have some kind of non-GTO, non-reg players. And then think where the money comes from. Who's my number one target on the table? Who's the best opponent in monetary value? Who gives me the most EV on this table? And why? It's often easy to see that, okay, there's VPIP 70 high, that's my target. But if someone asks you why he's good for you, how do you exploit him? Then often people might start thinking, actually I'm not that sure, let me think for a while. So often it improves your poker thinking when you just use time and think, how do I exploit these people? Or if you have a lot of reps like in Zoom pool, PokerStars, you have information on the opponent because the HUD works. So go to your HUD, open up reps, and start to see their stats and frequencies. Then is there something that is unbalanced? And if you find, how can I exploit that? Because in poker, we make money by exploiting opponents, and we save money by being balanced. And we want to make money as much as possible. We want to save money as much as possible. And versus worse opponents, we make money. Versus better opponents, we save money. So that's the first thing you need to know. Do I have any information on the opponent? Is he the one that we make money against, or is he the one that we save money against? Because that tells you instantly how to react. If he's unknown, what is your average opponent on the pool? Is he significantly worse opponent, or is he significantly better opponent? So then, if average opponent is good, then you can say my standard strategy is more about defending myself. If we go to PLO 2, where average opponent is a lot worse than we are, at least he should be, we can say that average opponent, we exploit him. And when the opponent gives us reason to be more defensive, we do. But before that, we just exploit. So the standard strategy is different for all the environments. So exploit to make money and don't be exploited to save money. I hope you enjoyed. I will see you later on the next video. Stay safe in the galaxy.